A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. That's what Jesus said. On the Thursday night of Holy Week, gathered in the upper room with his disciples, having just celebrated the Passover meal together. A new commandment I give you. But it isn't really a new commandment. We've heard this before. Jesus has been asked in the Gospels, what is the first and the great commandment? And he says the first commandment is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. And there's a second commandment that's just like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love God and love your neighbor. That is the foundational and first commandment. So love is not a new commandment. Love has been the call of God into the hearts of God's children from the very beginning. What's new about this commandment is that Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. As you have experienced my love, live that. That's what's new. Living love the way Jesus lived it. And immediately we say, well, we know that Jesus says, greater love has no one than this, than that they lay down their life for their friends. And he does say that, but not yet. He hasn't said that yet. And so we can't just rush to 2 chapters later in the Gospel of John, after Jesus has talked with his disciples in the upper room about his mission and God's plan and God's purpose, and how this is all going to be lived out in their lives together when Jesus is raised up in glory. We're not there yet. We're in the upper room together with Jesus, having just shared a meal together, a very important, powerful meal and an important and powerful time. And Jesus says to his disciples, love one another as I have loved you. That's the new commandment. What we have shared here in this room, live that way. That's what Jesus is saying. What we have shared here together in this room, live that way. And it will transform the world. So what did they share? Well, they shared being together at the table, which is a powerful expression of love. They had gathered at the table of the Passover meal, and they shared a celebration meal together. And Jesus is always talking about food. He's always talking about getting together and having a banquet. He tells stories about it. The kingdom of heaven is like a wedding banquet, and everyone was invited. And he tells a story about a young man who leaves home and loses everything. And when he returns to his father expecting to be humbled, his father embraces him and says, let's throw a party and have a big meal together and kill the fatted calf and celebrate. My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. It's together at the table, and that's what Jesus lived with his disciples. He shared a meal with 5,000 people on a hillside. He shared a meal at the home of Zacchaeus. I'm coming to your house and I'm having dinner with you. Jesus and his disciples shared a meal at the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, after he had called Lazarus out of the tomb from death to life. And the first thing you do when you are called from death to life is you have a party. And they get together and they have a meal together at the table. And they share the Passover meal. The Last Supper, it's called. And in the resurrection, Jesus meets the disciples at the table. They have breakfast on the beach. They break bread at the table in Emmaus. They share fish together. Jesus appears in the resurrection in the company of the disciples in the upper room, and he asks them, do you have anything here to eat? Which I think is the biblical foundation for coffee fellowship. Do you have anything here to eat? Yes, we do, and we celebrate that resurrection truth when we gather for coffee fellowship every Sunday after worship together at the table. And think about the times you've been with people together at the table in your life. That's an expression of love. And John's gospel raises the question, can you really love someone if you've never sat down and shared a meal with them? Think about it. Babies are born, and the first thing you do after they're born, you clean them up, and then it's time to eat. That's how this works. And when the babies come home from the hospital, and maybe you're giving them a bottle, you hand them off to the older siblings so there can be bonding there, and they share a meal together, and it's the bottle, and it's the baby, and it's the older brother or sister, and they're in it together, and it's love shared in that moment. And you think about the times you've had breakfast together, and lunch together, and dinner together, and late night snacks together with the ones you love. It's an experience of the blessing of the love of God. It's a powerful thing to share a meal together. And you forget how powerful, and then suddenly you're reminded. And this week we had a gentleman come by the church office who used to come by once a month. For years he would come by once a month because it's the end of the month and he just needs a little boost to get through to the start of the next month when the money comes in. And he first came to this church years ago when we had a thing here at Union Church, part of the men's rotating shelter in Cupertino and Sunnyvale. And the rotating shelter, if you weren't here in that time, was a place where 15 men would come, and there were 12 churches involved in Cupertino and Sunnyvale. And they would stay overnight, they would get shelter, they would get support, and they'd get a meal. And volunteers in the church would cook the meal, you'd sign up, you'd cook the meal, you'd bring it in, you'd set up the tables, and then you'd sit down and have a meal together. And that's how this gentleman became connected with Union Church. He was part of the rotating shelter. Now, the rotating shelter program was closed down because the insurance companies said, we won't insure the churches anymore if you have people sleeping overnight in your buildings. And so you can continue to run the program, we won't insure you. And so the program had to close down. But by the grace of God and through some amazing miracle, the gentleman who stopped by the church has his own place, his own apartment. He says, I have my own apartment now. He comes by about once a quarter now. He says it's got big French doors and a dining room table and a little kitchen, and I've got a TV. Life is good, he said, but I just need a little help. And I thought about 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, sitting down at a table in Calvert Hall, men's rotating shelter, and making a connection. And over all the years, that connection has been sustained. That's what love does. Jesus said, cherish every moment you have together at the table. That's where it begins. And he says, celebrate your triumphs. Celebrate the triumphs you experience and that you live in community and in relationship. And the Passover meal is a great celebration of the triumph of God. And they've just celebrated the triumph of God over the powers of darkness, which was Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and how God had liberated the Hebrews from captivity to freedom. And we go through things in our lives, and the people in our lives go through things. And there are times of triumph, and they need to be celebrated. So celebrate them. What are your times of triumphs? Well, birthdays are one. We've made it another year. It's a miracle. God is with me. Another year, another trip around the sun. It's a beautiful thing. Celebrate your birthdays and your anniversaries. Celebrate them. Celebrate your graduations and your times of recognition. Do you remember when? Celebrate them. Celebrate those triumphs. Weddings. Children being born. Grandchildren. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate the triumph of God where life wins and hope is fulfilled. And the holidays. Find some photographs of sharing the experience of life together at the holidays from years ago, when you were a younger version of yourself, and your family was a younger version of itself. And remember the journey you made from that moment to this, and all the triumphs you've shared together throughout your lives. Celebrate the holidays and celebrate home, because there is no place like home. And we forget that. And then the troubles come. And there in the upper room, Jesus says, persevere through the trouble. Share the trouble together. Get through it together. And it's amazing, this teaching in John's Gospel comes right between two events that shake the foundations of the community of Jesus' disciples. This passage in John 13 begins with, now when he went out. And who was it who went out? Judas went out. Judas, who felt that he had found a better way. And he went his own way. And it not only filled Jesus' heart with trouble, but it filled the community with fear. And we've been through trouble. And what follows after this teaching is Peter is going to stand up and say, though they all fall away, I will not deny you. And how did that work for him? Trouble comes. It comes into the life of every one of us. And we have so much to celebrate and so much to give thanks for, but when trouble comes and the fear fills our heart, you want to run away. You want to find a way out. You want to give up. And Jesus says, don't give up. And don't quit. Keep going. And God will lead you through the trouble. But you can't run away from it. And so when the hurt and the heartache and the disappointment and the discouragement come, it's not time to give up and it's not time to run away. It's not time to quit. It's time to lean into the promise of the presence of God, because God's love is with us in the trouble and through the trouble until God's promise is fulfilled and the trouble has been redeemed. We share the table We share the triumphs, we share the trouble, and there's one more thing that we share. Time. This experience is known as the Last Supper. And Jesus knew this was the last time that he would be sitting down at a table with his disciples, with the ones he loved. And in all of our lives, there will come a time when it will be the last time we sit down together at the table with the ones we love. And we don't know when that time is. And so we have to cherish all the time. We have to cherish every time. Because one time will be the last time. And so Jesus says, live your time in love. Don't waste your time together. Don't take your time for granted. Because to share time with the ones we love is the greatest, most precious gift we have to share. Love one another as I have loved you. And there in the upper room, Jesus is saying, come together at the table. Celebrate your triumphs. Find a way forward through troubles together. And hold on to precious time and share it lovingly with the important people in your lives. If you do that, Jesus said, you will love the way I love. And everyone will know that you are my disciple. So I read that this week. A new commandment I give you. And at the beginning of the week, I came across something that got my attention. The story of Dan and Maggie. The love story of Dan and Maggie. That's what it said. Now, it might not get your attention, but we actually have a Dan and Maggie in our lives. And Dan is Diana's brother, and Maggie is his wife. And so when I read the love story of Dan and Maggie, the Monday after Mother's Day, I thought, what is this? And I had to look into it. Different Dan and Maggie altogether. Our family is Dan and Maggie Dressler. This is Dan and Maggie Spector. Dan and Maggie Spector. Dan was a geologist, retired geologist now. Maggie, his wife of 36 years, was a social worker. And he writes about their life together 5 years after his wife passed away. Maggie died 5 years ago. And Dan writes about their life. How they raised 2 daughters and had 4 grandchildren and had a wonderful life. And Maggie was so alive and full of life and so engaging, and everyone was drawn to her. And he said, I was a geologist, I studied rocks. I mean, how exciting can that be? But Maggie brought life into their life. And for 30 years, they loved well, and then Maggie got sick. Started out with an autoimmune disease, which led to diabetes, which led to heart problems, which led to blood problems, which led to her first small stroke in her mid-60s. And so Dan said, I had loved her well for 30 years. And then our lives became pills and doctor's visits, and she didn't want to go out and be involved anymore. She just wanted to stay at home, maybe go to the dollar store, or maybe go to the farmer's market. She didn't want to go see the kids and the grandkids. If they want to see us, they can come here. And she stayed in her recliner. And she watched her shows. And she took her pills. one day after the other. And Dan said, for years, I tried to help us have a better life. I tried to help us have a better quality of life. But suddenly I found myself trying to control our life and control her life. And all that seemed to come out of my mouth was, why aren't you taking your pills? And why are you having candy when you shouldn't have candy? Don't you realize you have diabetes? And why don't you get up and walk more? And why aren't you willing to get up and go out anymore? You've got to go out and get some air. You've got to go and walk. You have to be active. And he said, all I did was spend my time saying, why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? You should do this. And he said it was a terrible way to live. The strokes came more frequently until the fourth one and Maggie was in the hospital. The doctors came and said that she wasn't going to get better and that her internal organs were shutting down. And after 3 days on a ventilator, Dan sat down with the doctors and the nurses and the chaplain and said, stop. The hardest day of his life. They had a memorial service for Maggie. He got up and spoke, and he said the trouble was you can say wonderful things about the people you love when they've made their journey home to be with God, but what you remember is what you didn't do when they were here. So he wrote a poem for Maggie, his wife, on the anniversary of her passing. What do I do now? I need to take care of you. Daughters, grandsons, family, they have each other. I don't have you. I don't have you, so what do I do now? My days are filled with no doctor's appointments, no farmers markets, no dollar stores, no hospital visits, no helping you up the stairs, no making coffee in the morning, no arguing with you about Corona, no watching you so unhappy, no trying to make you smile. What do I do now? I have to fill your pillbox, but the vials are empty. I have to take your blood pressure, but the cuff is empty. I have to wash your clothes, but the laundry basket is empty. Everything is empty. I am empty. How can I fill my emptiness with something if my emptiness is the shape of you? Dan wrote that to share it, to say he loved well for 30 years, and it was beautiful. And then he lost his way. And now he's trying to find his way again. And we all lose our way. And Jesus wants us to find our way again. And that's why he said, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. To love like that feeds the emptiness in our souls. and fills us with the knowledge that though we may part, we will be together again, because the bonds of love are never broken. You learn that when you sit down together at the table. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.